This is the first lesson of Unit 1, and we're going to look at order of operations. So I asked the class at this point to show me what they think the answer is to this question. And normally at this point there's a couple of different answers that people will give depending on how they see the question. Most common two answers are going to be 10 or 2. And the reason 10 would be an answer is 8 take away 3 is 5, and then 5 times 2 is 10. And the other possible answer is 2, and that would be 3 times 2 is 6. Nope. And then 8 take away 6 is 2. The sound effect's a little bit delayed on this. And if I click 2, it's probably going to be a massive delay. Oh, there you go. We get our little applause again. So that's for the reason given for the first one, and this is the reason for the second one. And then I'll ask students why it is the second one, and hopefully they'll give me an answer to do with order of operations, which is PEMDAS. Now, we normally talk about PEMDAS, but we're actually going to change that, and we're actually going to call it GEMDAS. And the reason we want to call it GEMDAS is there's a few extra things that we need to consider for Algebra 1. Some of these will be familiar because we know that E is exponents. And you can see the little exponent here. This is obviously M for multiplication. Division symbol here. This is the addition symbol. And then this is the subtraction symbol. Now, the things up here, the square root, absolute value and parentheses, are all examples of something that's been grouped together. So this is why I want to call this G, rather than just limit it to P for parentheses. We want to make sure that we're aware that this applies to all groupings, whether it be square roots or whether it be absolute value. So GEMDAS or PEMDAS is important for when we're answering this type of question. And that was the reason why that we can do multiplication before we do subtraction, because multiplication is higher than subtraction on that list. Now the problem with this is a lot of people then forget the very basics of this. So if I ask them to do PEMDAS on this, they know addition comes before subtraction. So they'll say this is 5, and then 8 take away 5 is 3. But actually that's wrong, and the reason it's wrong is there was something missing from my original picture. And what was missing from my original picture is there's not actually 6 categories as it first looks. It's actually 4. You do multiplication and division at the same time, and you do addition and subtraction at the same time, but you must remember to work left to right. So if I go back to that previous question for a second, subtraction and addition appear at the same time, so we work left to right. So we do 8 take away 3 is 5, and then if we add 2, we get 7. So it's not just a case of following the 6 things in order. You must group them together as a group of 4. Now, there are some additional questions that I can ask with relation to this. So, for example, fraction questions. So, if we've got a fraction, we should work out the top of the fraction first, or the numerator if you prefer. Then you should work out the bottom of the fraction, or the denominator. And then you can now go ahead and divide the answers. As the line, fraction bar, the line on the fraction means divide. So if we had a question like this, we would work out the top first. Now notice the top itself is order of operations as well. So we're going to do multiplication before addition. So 3 times 2 is 6, and 6 plus 6 is 12. On the bottom here, subtraction and addition are at the same time. It's actually like our last question. So we're just going to go left to right. So 5 take away 2 is 3, add on 4 is 4, and then if we divide them, we just get 3. Now absolute value, which is what these 2 lines were here, which is part of our grouping, it makes anything negative positive. What it doesn't do though is make anything positive negative. Anything that's positive we just simply ignore. We just take the number itself. So the absolute value of negative 7 is 7, we just ignore the negative sign, and the absolute value of 7, well, it's just 7. It just makes anything positive, and if it's already positive, then it just keeps it positive. So if you had a longer question like this, then you would still do the absolute value, do the grouping part, but notice this is a fraction question as well. So we work out the numerator first. Order of operations within the numerator is multiplication before subtraction. So 3 times 4 is 12, and then subtraction 2 take away 12 is negative 10. And for the bottom, 3 take away 5 is negative 2, and we've got the negative of the absolute value of negative 2. Now remember what the absolute value does, it takes anything that's negative and changes it to positive. So negative 10 becomes 10, and negative 2 becomes 2, but we still have this negative at the start. And then now we can go ahead and do 10 divided by negative 2, which is -5. And a lot of people get confused with the negative and the absolute value together. The absolute value makes it positive, but then the negative at the start can change it back to something that's negative. And they sometimes forget this rule, thinking that, oh, absolute value is going to be negative, it's going to be positive straight away. So keep a check on negatives in front there. Now also we can do square root questions as well. So the square root of 16 is 4, and the reason for that is 4 times 4 is 16. So the square root is which number multiplied by itself would give you the number that's inside the square root. Now we can also link this into a question as well. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit so we can see this a little easier. So if I'm doing this, this is an example of a grouping, the square root. So we're going to work out what's underneath the grouping, but we're going to split this into 2 because this is a fraction question as well. So first of all, we're going to do what's inside the square root, that's the grouping part. So 36 plus 64 is 100. And on the bottom here, we've got order of operations here as well, inside the square root, so multiplication for addition. So 2 times 6 is 12, and then 13 plus 12 is 25. And then now we can go ahead and work out what that is. So the square root of 100 is 10, the square root of 25 is 5, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. So probably a slightly more complicated question than we actually need, but to give you an idea. Now for this question here, they could also do this. As these are both square roots, the top and the bottom, they could put it in one big question, so make sure you're aware that you can split this up into 2 separate questions as well if you're actually doing that. And that should be enough for you to actually work through the questions on GEMDAS from the homework exercise now. Alternatively, if you want to look on YouTube, keywords would be order of operations, or possibly PEMDAS, which we talked about before. Probably not going to find GEMDAS, as we discussed.